Welcome to the MMHP and the 989. Podcasting from the Michigan Rock Legends Hall of Fame in downtown Bay City. Channeling all styles and eras of Michigan music history. From the city by the bay. And now, Dr. J, Sir Fred, Mr. Mike, and your host, Scott Baker.
We are here at the Michigan Rock Legends Hall of Fame here in Bay City, Michigan. Ready for another episode of the MMHP and the 989 here in the fourth season. And we are running a stride of good luck here. We have another home run grand slam today. I'm going to let Gary do the introduction. Usually Freddie gets to bring him in and talk, but Gary rarely gets to do this. So Gary, why don't you tell us about our host?
Well, we're privileged to have an inductee from the Michigan Rock and Roll Legends Hall of Fame, and that is Mr. Steve Lyman from the Scot Richard Case / SRC, one of the best Michigan bands of the late 60s, and well, they went into the early 70s, but their best period was the late 60s for sure. A couple albums that I think are just stone classics of Michigan rock and roll, and that is their first album, their debut, the self-titled SRC album, and then that came out in 1968, right, Steve? And
it was released, I think, in September of '68.
And then followed it up with another smash album. This one charted for quite a few weeks on the Billboard Top 200, I think 9 weeks that spent up there. And this is Milestones. So welcome, Steve Lyman.
Thank you, Steve.
I'm glad to be here, and I want to stress one thing right off the bat, is that I'm not here to sell anything.
You mean I can't buy the guitar?
I'm not promoting an album, and I'm not playing a big concert that I want everybody to come to next whenever this gets played. And I'm not selling Amway. So we're just having a casual conversation and remembering a lot of things from 50-some years ago.
We could only wish that we could have another SRC show.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Wow, such a good band.
Yes.
Well, Steve, let's start out at the very beginning. You were born in Michigan?
No. I was born on Staten Island in March of 1946, and I would joke that World War II ended, and 9 months later I plopped out. and my father was an architect, and the earliest memories that I have, we lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and my father worked for an architecture firm there, and he also did part-time teaching at Harvard in the architecture department. And so that's where my early years were, like preschool years, and then that I could remember when I was 4 years old.
How did you end up in Michigan?
After I finished the first grade, which would be in the spring of 1953, my dad got offered a job in Detroit at a big architecture firm in Detroit, and the person that he was replacing was Minoru Yamasaki, the one that designed the Trade Center.
Wow.
Minoru Yamasaki decided to leave Smith Hinchman Grills, which was the name of the company, and form his own company. And they had that opening for the person to lead the design department. And somehow my father got the position. And he was a graduate of the architecture school at the University of Michigan back before World War II began, and he served in the Coast Guard. So in the summer of '53, after I finished first grade, our family moved to Michigan, and we stayed in Ann Arbor for just a short time until we found a house to rent in Grosse Pointe Park. and then ended up in Bloomfield Township, just outside of Birmingham.
Okay, do you remember when you discovered rock and roll music?
Yeah. The first thing, well, my father was a violinist, and we didn't hear much music, pop music at all around the house. He played in a local volunteer orchestra, and then on the radio, if anything, on the FM radio, would be listening to classical music or sometimes some jazz music. And the earliest song that I recall, and I don't even recall who the artist was a song that had the line, "Down by the seaside, sifting sand, even little children love Mary Ann." And I can't even think who the artist was, but
So it sounds like from Trinidad.
well,
Yeah, maybe.
and this was back probably in about 1956 or so. I don't know.
Yeah, that would have
Yep.
been some, Calypso was very popular. I remember the Banana Boat song by
Those
the
were my
Terriers.
first 45s.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
and,
could have been Harry Belafonte or the Terriers.
That's the one that sticks in my mind as the first song. I thought, well, that's kind of neat. And beyond that, it wasn't until I got kind of turned on by Ricky Nelson's performances at the end of Ozzie and Harriet. And I didn't even know what a guitar was. I mean, at that time, I just saw him doing that, and I saw James Burton playing guitar. I thought, damn, I want to learn how to do that. Look how the girls are screaming.
Yes, indeed. I think those Ricky Nelson shows
Yeah.
probably inspired a lot of people.
Oh, hell
is
yes.
that you really got a chance to look at the guitar player because James Burton always had a solo in those
yeah.
Ricky records, and they always had the camera on him during that solo. Always.
Oh, yeah, that was wise.
Yeah, it was great.
He's still around. He's well up in his years, but he's. That was the earliest thing. I'll tell you another kind of funny story. When I was in the 6th grade, one of my classmates who lived about a mile from me was Glenn Quackenbush. And I had known Glenn since 1956, I guess. And I was in Cub Scouts with him. And his mother, Mary Quackenbush, was the den mother.
Oh, wow.
So we knew each other back then. We didn't hang around all the time. But when I had my 12th birthday party in March of, I gotta count here, like March of 1958, I had a bunch of friends over, and two of my friends gave me a 45 RPM record, and it was Huey Piano Smith with "Don't You Just Know It." And on the flip side was the song "High Blood Pressure."
I have that
I
45.
get a high blood pressure when you call my name.
One of the great two-sided 45s.
Yeah, and Glenn Quackenbush was one of the ones that gave me that record.
Wow.
So,
And for those who don't know Glenn Quackenbush, he is the keyboard player of SRC later
Yeah.
on down the road.
yeah, and so I knew Gary. Gary was 2 years younger, so I knew Gary and Glenn all the way back to 1956, even though we didn't hang around that much. But they only lived about a mile away. And when I was in high school and I started playing music with other people, Glenn got the notion to start playing in a band, and he hooked up with Iggy Clausen, who was known at the time just by his actual name, Elmer George Clausen. I think they met in a driver training class because Elmer was going to the Catholic school, Brother Rice Catholic school, whereas Glenn and I, and Gary too, were going to Seaholm High School in Birmingham. So they started a band, and Gary was not the lead guitar. He was just playing rhythm guitar, and there was another person in the band that was named Rhett Nichols, and I got hired. I guess I'd say hired by their band to give guitar lessons to both Rhett Nichols and Gary Quackenbush.
Do you remember the name of this band?
Yeah, it was called the Tremolos.
Okay.
It was called the Tremolos, and then eventually it turned into the Fugitives when they had a name change. So, but I was never in that band back then, and it wasn't until like after I'd been out of high school for almost 2 years that I ended up joining their band.
Were the Tremolos playing like teen clubs and that kind of thing at that time?
I don't know if they played any teen clubs as the Tremolos. I think after they turned it into the Fugitives, with the help of Dave Leone, who ran the hideout clubs. Dave Leone and Punch Andrews, they were actually partners for a while. I think that's when they started playing the teen clubs, and they became the house band, as far as I know. I mean, I was never there, but they became the house band at the Harper Woods
Hideout.
version of the hideout,
Okay.
which is over right near Grosse Pointe.
You never attended the hideouts?
I never did. The first time I was ever at the hideout was when the Scot Richard Case played there in the early part of 1967. Before that, I knew the existence of this girl band, the Pleasure Seekers, and I just heard that from the Quackenbush brothers. I heard about it, but I never saw them play or until the Scot Richard Case played there. They were the Pleasure Seekers were the opening band when we first played there.
Okay, and the Fugitives basically are kind of the root band, I guess you could say, for the Scot Richard Case, right?
Yeah, but it depends how you perceive it. I mean, we would think that I joined the Fugitives about a half year before they morphed into what became the Scot Richard Case, and the only thing that was addition to that was Scott Richardson, and he was in that band, The Chosen Few, which I never saw, but from his perspective, he might perceive it like he was the band, and then he got the Fugitives to back him up. I don't know.
Well, right, and Ron Ashton was in the Chosen Few,
I think so,
as well, right? But he didn't come on as a roadie or
No.
anything like that.
No, and Ron Ashton together with Iggy Pop, as they call him, they used to come over to our house in Ann Arbor during that first half year that we were forming, starting to get known locally and trying to push that I'm So Glad record. And we knew at the time that they were trying to put a band together. And I had seen the Iguanas play a couple of years before, and I thought they were horrible. I saw them play on the U of M campus, and after 2 songs, I thought, I gotta leave. I'm not even gonna listen to this. And so when we heard that they were trying to put a band together, my general thought was, boy, good luck with that, And eventually it turned into a thing where, I mean, they played what the people wanted.
Well,
maybe
yeah.
more so than we did.
What can you tell us about Jeep Holland? When did he get involved in?
Well, he was involved before I became part of this scene, because he was certainly involved throughout 1966, because that's when the Rationals put out their version of Respect. And if he was doing stuff even before that, I never knew about it. And it was what happened in terms of the Fugitives. We played some gigs during the fall of '66, and Glenn Quackenbush and his brother Gary started getting the idea, we want to do something more than this, than just being a cover band playing songs by the Rascals or whoever, outsiders, and they approached G. Polland. The two of them for sure. I'm not sure. I wasn't there, and G. Polland was the one that suggested Scot Richardson because he knew the Chosen Few were breaking up, and he also suggested Iggy Pop
as a drummer.
No, as a singer.
Oh, okay.
But this was before I was even in it. I just kind of heard this stuff after the fact because I was going to Eastern Michigan University, trying to keep my grades up and possibly heading toward getting an engineering degree if I could get back into the University of Michigan where I flunked out the previous year. But that's what happened is the Quackenbush brothers approached G. Polland and asked for suggestions from him. He said, well, you need to have a more out front lead singer that's really going to get attention.
How come they didn't go with Dave Leone or Punch Andrews? I mean, those guys.
I don't even know because I never had any contact.
All right.
With Punch back in the day when, and the one irony having to do with Iggy Pop. Not really so much with him, but with his former band, the
Iguanas?
No, not the Iguanas. The
Prime Movers.
Prime Movers Blues Band. Excuse me. The Prime Movers Blues Band was the house band for a while at a place called the Schwaben Inn on Ashley Street, and the band that I was in 1965 was called the Ravens, and we were the house band there for at least 4 or 5 months, which led to me flunking out of the University of Michigan because I couldn't keep up with all my classes when I was up till 2 or 3 in the morning, 5 or 6 nights a week. But so we were the Ravens were the house band there at the Schwaben Inn about a year before the Prime Movers became the house band there.
What kind of music were you playing in the Ravens at that point? Were you a blues band or?
No, it was more pop. We did a lot of Stone songs. We did songs by the Pretty Things. We did some blues songs, Howlin' Wolf kind of stuff. A few things like that. Some Beatles songs, and one of the people in the Ravens, the rhythm guitar player that played behind me, he was an architecture student, and he was a fraternity brother with George Frayne, who's better known as
Cody.
Commander Cody.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these things I didn't find out until much later, but
all kinds of connections.
So there is a slight connection to the Hot Rod Lincoln.
Yeah. Yeah. So now you're in the Fugitives, and you're there when Scot Richardson is brought in as the lead singer, right?
Yeah, it was. Glenn Quackenbush was in the process of possibly joining a fraternity because he was going to U of M at the time. And the previous year after he graduated from high school, he went to a college in Middlebury, Vermont. But then he transferred to University of Michigan for that year, the year that goes from 1965 to 1966. And he was in the process of becoming a fraternity brother there, along with John Boyles, who was the lead singer and bass player of the Fugitives. And when we first started practicing with Scot Richardson and Robin Dale as the bass player, we practiced in the basement of that fraternity house. I think it was the Chi Phi fraternity house, which is on the corner of Hill Street and Washtenaw, I think.
Is that the old John Sinclair houses?
No, that was the John Sinclair house was on the other side of the street,
Oh, okay.
and maybe down west about a block or so.
Ah,
But this was that fraternity house, if I remember correctly. It was the fraternity house on the corner of Hill and Washtenaw, and they had that big rock out in front that people were always painting.
right. Still on.
Okay. And so that's where we practiced at first. And I was still a student at Eastern Michigan, and I wasn't even sure if I wanted to get involved in this. For one reason is we were getting rid of a very talented bass player that was a good singer, even though he didn't have, maybe good stage presence. And we were going to get Scot Richardson to sing with us. And Robin Dale, he was kind of very elementary on the bass, and I thought, do I possibly want to leave college and my college education to get involved in this? And I was kind of put on the fence by Glenn. Said, you gotta have to make up your mind. You want to come or not? And I just said, okay, I'm coming. So I didn't know what I was getting into. And then they got that house to rent on Broadway Street. It was 1127 Broadway Street, several blocks away from where the train station is, after where Plymouth Road splits apart from it. And they got that house there, and even though I was still a student at Eastern Michigan, I started staying at that house quite a bit. And that's where Scott and I wrote the song "Who Is That Girl?", which was, we really quickly wrote that thing.
Okay, and that was on the B-side of I'm So Glad?
That ended up being the B-side of the A Square single, yes.
How did, there's always some question about how you guys came up with I'm So Glad. Do you remember, did
Yes.
you have the Cream album, or?
Okay, well, G. Polland was the manager of Discount Records on the corner of Liberty and State Street. And aside from his passion of running that record store, he was also ordering albums from England all the time. And he had, when we first started practicing together, he already had the Cream album from England, the Fresh Cream album. And we started playing it, and we said, "Oh, well, let's use that song as a cover song."
And this is before it was released in the United States?
This leads into another funny story. Is once I'm So Glad was out by us and started charting in Detroit, there were a lot of people that were fascinated maybe by that song. That later on that summer, when the Cream album finally got released in the United States, they thought, wow, the Cream are doing a Scot Richard Case song. It wasn't that way at all. It was the opposite way. And then on top of that, the song was written by Skip James, a blues artist,
Right.
Yeah.
back in the 40s or 30s. I'm not sure when it was. So, but so we got the song off of the British album, and the first live performance that the Scot Richard Case did, and we didn't even have a band name at that time. They just called it Scotty's Group because we didn't know what we were going to call ourselves. And the first live performance was at the Fenton Community Center, south of Flint. And it wasn't even a feature of us as like being the main band there. It was a thing where there were maybe a half dozen bands there, and each band would get up and play, whatever, 4 or 5 songs or so, and then they'd get off stage and someone else would get up. And we played there, and we played a song called "Get the Picture" by the Pretty Things, which we had intended to be our first single. We were going to make that the first single with our original song "Who Is That Girl" on the flip side. And when we played that show, we played at the most 6 songs. It might have only been 4 songs, but one of the songs that we played was "I'm So Glad," and G. Pollen got all enthused after we played that, and he says the audience went wild. You got to go back in the studio, because we had already recorded "Get the Picture" and "Who Is That Girl" at the United Sound Studios in Detroit. And so G. Pollen got on the phone. We need some studio time, and we went down there and did a real rushed version of that. And then so G on his A Square Records released it as "I'm So Glad" with "Who Is That Girl," and he had this other song that we originally were going to do, but he held on to it. And that's why at some point after we had split away from G. Pollen as management and got Pete Andrews to be our manager, G. Pollen had that recording left. So he put out a 45 RPM song with a Rational song on one side, and on our side of the record, which was the B side or whatever, it was the "Get the Picture" song,
Right.
"Pretty Things" song.
And then he released it by a slightly different name.
Yeah,
too,
he
right?
said "The Old Exciting Scot Richard Case," which I think had something to do with the fact that he was really pissed off that we had left his management and gone on a different direction. And the reason that all came about was we were starting to get a few creative ideas in terms of what we wanted to do musically. And I think G. Pollen pretty much wanted us to be just a pop music band with Scott Richardson out in front. And we had other musical ideas that we wanted to get into, and they weren't jiving with what
Right.
Jeep's vision was.
Yeah, he seemed to be more of a singles guy.
Yeah.
And I always thought that, the Rationals could have done better if they would have released an album, the early singles, but it didn't happen.
A lot of the problem with the Rationals, I think, came about with the collapse of Cameo Parkway.
Yeah.
Oh, right. That hurt.
That
hurt a lot of people.
They could have gone on to a major career if it wasn't for that.
Yeah, that hurt Question Mark and the Mysterians, too.
Yeah.
And Bob Seger. Heavy Music had
yeah.
come out when that label went down.
So,
Yeah.
do you know the story about Heavy Music and Bob Seger?
No.
No.
Okay, we're going to jettison into the future. This is probably the latter part of the summer of 1967. Bob Seger used to come over to our house every so often because he liked us, our band, and he liked to sit around and chat with us. And I remember him being at our house, and we had in the kitchen, on the side of the kitchen, there was a side door that went out to the driveway. And we were going out to the car to go somewhere. And I was walking out the door with Bob Seger, and he said to me, I won't say exact words because I don't remember the exact words, but basically he said to me, I mentioned your name, the name of your band in the Heavy Music. And I looked at him like, what? What'd you do that for? And I thought it was kind of corny for bands to mention each other. And I said, what'd you do that for? And he says, I just thought it'd be a good idea. And people that have the old Heavy Music 45 RPM, if they listen to the B side of it, where Heavy Music goes on and on, there's a place where it goes, NSU, SRC, Stevie Winwood got nothing on me. And,
I'll listen to it again.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
NSU.
classic.
Now NSU is one of the songs on the Cream Fresh
yes,
Cream album.
right.
So he said NSU, SRC, Stevie Winwood got nothing on me. Heavy Music.
Right.
And,
because that's when Stevie Winwood was with the Spencer Davis Group, and
Yeah.
they had "Give Me Some Lovin'" and
yeah.
"I'm a Man." Really great tunes
So-
there. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and you could say that Heavy Music was copied off of the feeling that was on Stevie Winwood's. Which song was it?
"I'm a Man." I think it was. Yeah. Had that real deep,
Yeah.
bass drum thing going on.
So, but it creates a real laugh in the future when something that sounded so corny back then And now that Seger has gone on to monstrous fame, people say, "Wow, he mentioned your song." Oh, yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, he did.
Unfortunately, finally, Cameo Parkway put out those original recordings
Yeah.
that they did. So a lot of people probably had never heard the B side of heavy music.
I forgot about that when I picked up the
Yeah,
reissue.
really.
Yeah.
Well, you said I loved your version of "I'm So Glad." Now, you thought that was kind of rushed. It wasn't.
It was very rushed. I mean, one thing, but a lot of people tell me that they like our version better than the Cream's version.
I do. I'm one of those people.
And it's got more excitement because I mean, a lot of that music on the Fresh Cream album was very drone-like. I mean, I'm not sure the right word for that, but it was like, somber or something like that.
It was produced odd. I thought that.
I thought that suffered from production also. It wasn't as good as you think
It
it
reminded me
should
of
have
the
been.
early Mountain albums. They just
Yeah.
had strange production.
Yeah. So, what becomes of all this?
Yes. Well, tell us about how you ended up after you left A Square and Jeep Holland.
Okay.
Okay, then you get signed to a major label.
Well, okay. We started looking around for studios to possibly record our album, and in the summer of 1967, June of 1967, the Who played at the Fifth Dimension in Ann Arbor. And when they were going to do an afternoon show and an evening show. When it was time for the afternoon show, they didn't have the equipment. Equipment was coming in on a separate airplane. It hadn't arrived at Metro Airport yet. So, what equipment are they going to use? They're going to use SRC's equipment. So they did the afternoon show. Keith Moon was playing E.G. Clausen's drums. As far as, I'm not sure. I wasn't at the afternoon show. I was doing something else right at the time. I went to the evening show. But in the afternoon show, I would assume that, God, my brain can't remember things. So the bass player of the Who.
John Entwistle.
Entwistle, yeah. Boris the Spider. John Entwistle probably played Robin Dale's bass. And then Pete Townsend, well, what he would do, he would go to the local pawn shop and buy a guitar that he could tune up and play, so he could destroy it at the end of the show. So they used the Super Beetle amplifiers that we had, as well as E.G.'s drums and whatever the bass amp that Robin had, and played that afternoon show. And then after that show, I went to Metropolitan Airport with their main roadie that was traveling with them. I think his name was Neville. I don't know the last name. And a couple other people, and we took our Dodge van that we had with the trailer behind it and drove to Metro Airport and picked up all their equipment and brought it back to the Fifth Dimension, so that when they did their second show, they'd have all their own equipment. And anyway, later on, that in the autumn of that year, when we were starting to think about where are we going to record our album, and we found out that the Who were playing at a Catholic high school in New Jersey. I think it was called Union Catholic High School.
Wow, that's where my grandson goes to school right now.
Oh,
Wow. Okay. Well, it was Union Catholic High School, and what's the name of that town? I just well, if you don't think of it, whatever. But anyway, we found out that the Who were playing there, and we wanted to go see them. we're crazy enough people. We're all going to hop on an airplane and fly into the Newark airport and then go see this band. But we figured we can make this a business trip because there's a studio in Hempstead, Long Island that we wanted to check out as a possible studio. And so we flew into Newark Airport and got a hotel room and then got in this rented car that we had, drove out to where that high school was, and we sat. We got into the gymnasium where the show was going to be. They had a stage set up and all kinds of chairs. We got in there, and before the big crowd came in, and we got some seats like just a couple rows back from the front, and we were all decked out in our fancy clothes, flashy colored clothes, niche, shirts that you could see through that had different colors, and so we were looking like like we just got off a spaceship, and all these people came in. They're like the students at the high school, and they probably wondered who are these guys. And the Who came out there, did a fantastic show, and what this is leading up to is after the show was over, we started following the tour bus that the Who were on because they were heading back to wherever the hotel is that they were staying. We were following in our car, and I think they knew that we were following us because Pete Townsend had the bus driver pull over on the side of the road, and Pete gets out of the bus, walks to the back of the bus, and we got our headlights on, and he goes, "Are you the guys from Ann Arbor?" And we said, "Yeah." And he went, "Yeah." And he got back on the bus and then took off and went to their hotel. So a lot of funny stories like that. And this, so, and then in terms of who was going to produce us, we didn't know. And Pete Andrews found out about this producer named John Reese. His actual name is John Reese Eddins, Eddins, but he called himself John Reese in the studio. It's RHYS. And he found out about him, and we went over to his apartment, John Reese's apartment, which was in right on the border of Highland Park in Detroit, near 6 Mile and Woodward, McNichols and Woodward. And we met John Reese there. And when we met him there, it dawned on me, this is the same guy that was in the Golden World Studios when I was in there in 1965 with the Ravens. We went because the Ravens, a couple months before that, a little bit earlier in the summer of '65, auditioned at Barry Gordy's office, right in Barry Gordy's office, with Barry Gordy sitting at a desk and watching us play. And Barry Gordy's reaction, I really love his reaction. He liked the music that the Ravens were playing, but he said, "How come you guys don't have any choreographed moves?" Because we weren't used to doing that, all the stuff that the Motown people did.
Sure.
He says, "You need to have choreographed moves." And he sent us over to the Golden World Studios, which he was eventually going to buy up on Davison. And when we went in there, we did some test recording, and John Reese was the one that was behind the controls. So it dawned on me when SRC finally met him that, wow, this is the same guy that did a little bit of a session with the Ravens. So that's where, and then, so the first album was recorded at Terra Sherma Studios. It's TERA and then SHIRMA.
yeah.
And it was started by the two brothers that were in the Sunliners, or one of them. And
The Sunliners, who eventually became Rare Earth, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where the first album was recorded. And then after the first album was recorded and we were starting, when we got around to doing a second album, we had acquired some used Scully equipment from the United Sound Studios. They were getting rid of their 4-track so they could have all 8-track or whatever. And we were able to set up recording in our own home on Broadway Street.
This is in Ann Arbor?
Right, in Ann Arbor.
Yeah.
So when Milestones, we started laying down the tracks at Milestones, we laid down the initial tracks right in our house.
Jeez.
We didn't have to pay that expensive studio time. And then what we would do is go into the studio and Gary would play his guitar solo, or Gary would play guitar solo, and then I'd match his guitar solo with what I was playing. And we would add the vocals and do the final mixing there.
Well, let's back up a little bit because we probably need to establish first off how you became the Scot Richard Case, and then how did that morph into SRC?
Okay, that's a good subject. Well, the Scot Richard Case, we didn't even have the name for like the first couple of performances that we did. So they sometimes it got booked as Scotty's group or Scotty and his band or whatever, and it was Jeep Holland's idea to feature the band around the name of the lead singer. And Scot Richardson, I don't know, this might not have been his idea, it might have been Jeep's idea, was shorten your stage name to Scot Richard. So he started spelling it S-C-O-T, 1 T, and then just Richard instead of Richardson. And I think we named the band about a week after we played at that debut show at Fenton. And we were trying to think of a name. Well, let's see. We can't call ourselves the Scot Richard Experience because Jimi Hendrix already got that. And we were just thinking around the different things, or the project or whatever. And my middle name is Case. So somehow we stumbled upon that. Case. How about the Scot Richard Case? This is the situation about Scot Richard. And some people later on thought, oh, Case, was he in court for drugs or something like that? I don't know. And the rumors get spread around. Yeah, so we settled on the Scot Richard Case, which was to mean the situation about this person, Scot Richard. And that became our name, and it was mostly Jeep's idea to have this band named after the lead singer. And we were doing mostly, cover songs. We did a few songs. I mean, the Who Is That Girl was the very first song that was written by the band. And even after that, we didn't really get into much songwriting. There were a couple ideas that we started that never really got finished. I think there was a song called Mirror Man and one song called Two Is the Secret, but they never got completed enough where, okay, this is a song, we're keeping it like this. And what happened around the time when we were getting ready to possibly split from Jeep Holland on his management, the band was wanting the band to be named something that represented everybody in the band rather than the focus on a lead singer, with a backing band. And we had already established ourselves as a Scot Richard Case. It's hard to change a name, and some people were calling us SRC just for short, just like they CCR,
Yep.
And so we just settled on just keeping the letters SRC, which to us at the time was not really meant to stand for Scot Richard Case, even though people would do that. We just wanted to say our name was SRC, and those are the 3 letters we chose to represent who we are and what our music.
So that had nothing to do with Capitol Records per se? Okay.
No, we did that before Capitol Records.
All right.
So we signed with Capitol Records under the name SRC. We had already dropped the Scot Richard Case name at least several months before
And
that.
you had told me before that actually you had a chance to sign with Trax Records,
Yeah,
which was the Who's label, or the label that the Who was
Yes.
recording with in England.
yeah, they. I don't remember this too well, but I know that the actor Terence Stamp, his brother Chris Stamp, was one of the people in management over the Who, and he came with another person, and there was nobody from the Who there, but those two people were at our house talking to us about contracts, and it sounded really appealing. Like, let's go over to England and record on the Who's label, and we ended up choosing the Capitol thing mainly because Capitol Records had such a better distribution worldwide. And our eyes were in the sky, thinking, "Oh boy, we're going to become really big." You never know. Yeah, I mean, everybody shoots for that.
Sure.
And if we become really big, we don't want our records just available in England and Europe. We want them available everywhere.
Well, the Capitol label, the Prestige.
Yeah.
The Beatles. I think by that time it probably formed Apple, but all the original.
No, the Apple
recordings.
wasn't quite formed in, but it
All right, so
but it was nearly
all
there.
those hits were on Capitol, as were
Yeah.
the Beach Boys, so two of the biggest bands in the world.
So anyway, that's how that happened, and what the thing that we found out is the hard way is that Capitol doesn't sink a lot of money into promoting anything until they know it's gonna turn into cash for them. So we still had to plug along, doing the best to promote ourselves, and if the album had started selling like hotcakes, well, I'm sure Capitol would have put ads all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
So.
What did you do to promote yourself at the time? What
Well,
was some of the
mostly-
unique strategies that you guys had to come up
Mostly just the band didn't do it. So the Pete Andrews, our manager, probably did a lot of things that we don't even know. I don't know.
with? Is Pete Andrews Punch Andrews?
No.
Okay.
They're not even related, I don't think.
Punch Andrews' first name is Ed,
Okay.
and they both got the Andrews last name. But
Okay.
as far as
You mentioned Punch earlier, I thought, so I was trying to
yeah.
catch up with.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar.
Punch Andrews was a partner with Dave Leone at the early Hideout clubs, and then he started. They kind of split up, and he took Bob Seger and a couple other things, and started his own thing separately from Dave Leone, and
Pete Andrews did his own thing coming into this.
and Pete Andrews had already been. Even maybe back in 1966, he had a club up in Tawas, East Tawas, I think, the Mothers Club.
Yeah.
And I think Pete Andrews ran that. I don't know, and he possibly ran the Mothers Club that was in Ann Arbor too. There's a lot of gray area there that I don't know.
He used to book or run the Canterbury House,
Yes, probably.
because we played there.
Okay, you probably did. But it was the. I brought this up with you, Gary, before, that the big change that happened in SRC, at least from my understanding, was after Glenn Quackenbush got a B3 organ, and on the first album, I'd say a large part of the ideas on that first album really had their genesis within Glenn playing around on his organ and coming up with patterns and chord changes and melodies.
Yeah, can we talk about some of the songs on that first album? I mean, one that I still love is One Simple Task.
Okay.
What was the background on that? I know you had said you were The band was into Procol Harum, and I think I can hear some Procol Harum in that.
Yeah, we didn't try to
song.
be like Procol Harum, but we really appreciated what they were doing. Lyrically, as you know, with Keith Reed as a lyricist, as well as Matthew Fisher on the organ. Anyway, let's go to One Simple Task. The idea of the song is like, I sort of think like a Rumpelstiltskin kind of thing, where somebody is being tested, like, I won't tell you the secret truth of life unless you master all these other things. That's the general idea.
Yeah, I mean that whole album really had a mystical feel to it that made it very unique in terms of psychedelic records. When I see what you're saying there in that one.
And that wraps up our first part with Steve Lyman here from the band SRC. Steve took us back through his early career as well as his very own beginnings, as well as through the great Scot Richard Case into SRC history. Steve will stick around here for 2 records that we'll find out here in part 2 and give more backstory here on the album that we're talking about here in part 1. Until then, we want to thank you for tuning in to the MMHP and the 989. See you in 2 weeks.
The MMHP is hosted on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and our own Libsyn podcast site. You can also search MMHP 989 on Facebook for up-to-the-minute information, as well as both Dr. J and Sir Fred's album picks of the week, posted every weekend. Don't forget to look for Mr. Mike's local music live series, posted frequently on MMHP's Facebook hub, as well as Scott's Mid-Mitten 15 from Harvest Canteen, featuring one-on-one interviews with Michigan music artists. You can connect with Scott on the web at scottbakermusic.com, Dr. J at michiganrockandrolllegends.com, Sir Fred at fredrife.com, Mr. Mike at YouTube at Mr. BT1. That's MRBTEE and the number 1. Brought to you by Michigan Rock and Roll Legends, located both inside the Bay County Historical Museum on Washington Avenue, as well as Scotty's Sandbar on Evergreen Drive at the Bay City Middle Grounds.
On behalf of our hosts, Dr. J, Sir Fred, Mr. Mike, and myself, this podcast wouldn't have been here without the voice of the MMHP, Mr. Eddie Switek, the generosity of the Bay County Historical Museum, which hosts the Rock and Roll Legends Hall of Fame, as well as this podcast, Mr. Alan Garcia, all of our guests, and especially to the listeners. We want to thank you